The only mistake the New Orleans Saints made in moving on from kicker Blake Grupe is not doing it sooner.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the New Orleans Saints might be in a rebuild, but they are not immune to criticism. Kellen and Tyler Shough have an opportunity against the Miami Dolphins this weekend to instill some confidence in an offense that desperately needs it, and will kick everything off with Blake Grupe being moved on from. It might have been a tough decision for the New Orleans Saints, but it was the right one. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, the #1 sports podcast network. Thank you very much for helping us get here. Today's episode brought to you by your friends over at FanDuel, where right now new customers can bet just $5. And if that first $5 bet wins, you win $300 in bonus bets used across the app. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started today. The New Orleans Saints have moved on from kicker Blake Grupe, have a succession plan in place. And honestly, the only thing that they've done wrong in the handling of this situation potentially is that they didn't do it sooner. Now, listen, I'm going to talk a lot about Blake Grupe and the things that didn't go well for him on the field. I want to be very clear. Personally, the dude's awesome. Awesome guy. Was always willing to speak to media in the best times and in the most challenging times. Always super supportive of everything. Great dude, and did a lot within this community as well. Some stuff you heard about, some stuff you haven't heard about. He was just one of those cats. And so I think he deserves at least a lot of credit for the time and the work that he put in during his time here, but obviously didn't end the way that he wanted it to. And the reason why is because on the field, he didn't produce. So when I talk about him being somebody that the Saints needed to move on from, I mean that specifically from an on-field production perspective. This is a guy that missed 3 field goals, one in each game, one in each of the first 3 games, then looked to get the ship righted a little bit in week 4 when he went 2 for 2, then missed another couple of field goals, and then over the course of the last 6 weeks, went 8 for 11, and had a total field goal percentage on this season of 69.12% over the course, or 69.2%, over the course of the first 12 weeks of the season. That's the lowest mark for any kicker through the first 12 weeks with at least 25 field goal attempts. Any kicker in New Orleans Saints history since 1970, a 55-year low. It was time to move on from Blake Grupe, and now he's going to go get an opportunity to see if he can find his next landing spot and where his next chance might be. So all power to him, and I hope that things continue to go well for him. He was an awesome dude here in New Orleans, just wasn't awesome on the field, and that was very surprising to everybody because he was incredible throughout training camp, missing just 1 kick in all of training camp. But it goes to show you, sometimes the training camp stars that don't translate to be the in-game stars aren't just the big wide receivers that go out there to make catches, and they're the big tight ends or the defensive players that are flashing. Sometimes it can happen to anybody. And so for New Orleans, this was the decision that they needed to make. I'm sure it was a hard one. This is typically an organization that really gets a little bit, maybe sometimes too patient with its guys, and then can be slow moving from that perspective. We've seen it with coaches. We've seen it with offensive coordinators. We've seen it with all that other stuff. However, the decision here was the right decision, and the Saints eventually got their way there, although they probably could have made the decision a little bit early. But now they've done it, and moving ahead, they have signed former LSU Tiger, go Tigers, Cade York is now going to be a player that will be in competition, I believe, with international program player, international pathway program player, Charlie Smyth, for the kicking role with Blake Grupe now off of the roster. The reason why I think that there's going to be a competition here is because of the fact that Cade York wasn't signed to the active roster despite 2 open roster spots at the time of his signing, with Brandon Cooks having been moved on from. By the way, also a team captain. The Saints moving on from 2 team captains mid-season. A little bit uncharacteristic, unusual for an NFL team between he and Blake Grupe. But there were open roster spots. The Saints didn't sign him to an open roster spot. Instead, they moved him to the practice squad. So I think you're going to see a little bit of a competition there, and we'll see where things go. But they signed Cade York. They avoid the absolute tone-deaf decision that it would have been to sign Justin Tucker. Thank goodness for that. And so now New Orleans is in a situation where they've got a 24-year-old fourth-round pick who is the best kicker in his college program's history at LSU. And at least you've got somebody to give things a try with that has shown some promise. And then you have another guy as an option that you've been developing for almost 2 years now in Charlie Smyth. We'll see who ends up being the guy by the time that it's all said and done as a team gets ready to head to Miami. I assume they'll just kind of compete throughout practice here. So for the Saints, when it comes to Cade York, what do you need to know about him? 73.3% field goal percentage throughout his career. However, sunk 81.8% most recently during his time with the Cincinnati Bengals at the end of 2024, where the Bengals signed him to kind of help to cover for an injured Evan McPherson at that time. So 81.8%, much better than 69.2%. We'll see if he can end up continuing to keep that moving forward. Now, listen, I do think that this was a tough choice for the New Orleans Saints to make. It shouldn't have been, but the organization tends to make these types of decisions slow and tough and challenging and all those other pieces. But it's another example of them here during the late stretch of the season, kind of getting out of their own way in a little bit, even if they're doing it late. Moving on from Blake Grupe, who was shown more patience than the starting quarterback that they decided to roll with at the beginning of the season. They traded Rashid Shaheed, who was their most tradable asset outside of Chris Olave, who they were not going to trade. They let Brandon Cooks go, who was not a part of their future. They traded Trevor Penning away, who was not a part of their future. All the offseason changes as well, not staying the course. One of the big things that I said when the Saints were flipping their coaching staff and all those other things was that at least if they fail in 2025, they fail trying something new. So at least at this point, if the field goal kicker comes in and struggles, at least the field goal kicker comes in and struggles, and it's a new field goal kicker as opposed to the guy that was struggling, continuing to have the belief that he wouldn't struggle anymore. I really like the way that our good friend Hunt Palmer, colleague of mine over at LouisianaSports.net, and of course with 104.5 ESPN Baton Rouge, I really like the way that he framed it, where he said, you're not kicking field goals anymore to win games. You're kicking field goals now to find a kicker. The New Orleans Saints have a special teams problem. They had issues with the field goal kicking. They have issues at punter. Some of the worst statistics across punting for the New Orleans Saints all belong, or across the NFL, all belong to the New Orleans Saints. Amongst all the punters in the NFL that have attempted at least 20 punts, Kai Kruger ranks last in net yards per punt, and starting field position off of punts as well at about the 28-29 yard line. So for New Orleans, like, this was something they needed to address, not something that they needed to sit back and wait to see if it was going to get better. So at least they made that decision. Should have made it sooner, but at least they made the decision. Coming up next, what I want to look at is the Saints turning their focus ahead now to the Miami Dolphins. We'll figure out what kicker is going to be on the field, but we know the head coach that's going to be calling plays, and we know the quarterback that's going to be throwing the football, and both of those guys have a major opportunity against the Dolphins to instill confidence in an offense that desperately lacks it. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Speaking of the NBA, I've been cleaning up a bunch over on FanDuel thanks to the player props options that you can get with Derek Queen. I kind of just make a habit of taking the over on anything with him. Didn't work out with points in their win just a couple nights ago against the Bulls, but really like what we've been seeing from Derek Queen so far, and he has been an absolute home run on FanDuel for me. So maybe you want to get in on that. You can also get in on same-game parlays, live betting. You can even do live bet same-game parlays over on FanDuel as well. Just the coolest stuff. So make sure you go and check that out. And if you like the New Orleans Saints in this weekend's matchup, 5.5-point underdogs up against the Miami Dolphins, you can get in on that as well. Right now, you can head over to FanDuel where they're giving away $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just head over to FanDuel.com to sign up and start playing your game with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, family, the New Orleans Saints offense needs to instill some confidence in itself and in the fan base. And this weekend's game up against the Miami Dolphins is a really solid opportunity to do that. The Dolphins are a very, very interesting defense under defensive coordinator Anthony Weaver, who, by the way, was also a New Orleans Saints head coach candidate. So maybe a little bit of a charge there from Kellen Moore, who obviously would never admit it, publicly. But, look, that's the guy that they chose you over. You're going up head to head against his defense. Here's an opportunity to get those to kind of show like, hey, they made the right choice. Now, of course, the Saints are not dealing with the most talented roster right now. All those other things that could potentially get in the way, but the Dolphins aren't dealing with the most talented roster over in Miami either. So we're going to be visited by our good friend, Kyle Krabs, in tomorrow's episode for Crossover Thursday. Then on Friday, we're going to dive into that film study around Taysom Hill. I need a little bit more time with all of the Justin Tucker and Cade York and kicker situation and everything like that. So we'll get to that on Friday. But Thursday, we'll have Kyle here in the building who, we'll kind of go over all this stuff with as well. But I wanted to focus on the defense for the Miami Dolphins, who are interesting. They have some things that open up the door wide open for the Saints to want to attack, but then they also have some things that kind of show you that, hey, they could be pesky, right? Like, so if you beat them, you're beating them on the defensive side by performing well on offense and taking advantage and exploiting some of the flaws that are very present for Miami. So they're a really interesting team. Things they do really, really well, but some very easy to expose weak points as well. Here's an example, or a couple of examples. The Miami Dolphins right now are number 12 in the NFL when it comes to passing defense in terms of passing yards allowed per game. 12th in the NFL, just outside of top 10, performing very well there. However, in the passing game, they don't take the ball away, only 3 interceptions on the season. So that means you could potentially be a little bit more aggressive up against this secondary. Now, another piece to that is that they are the 29th ranked rushing defense. So teams love to run the football against Miami. It's one of the reasons why Miami is one of the lowest teams in terms of passing attempts against, which then translates to fewest passing yards per game, or, to those passing yards per game, and translates to the lack of opportunities for interception. So there's a little bit of a balance there to be struck. But the thing about that is that if Miami is weak against the run game, if you, as the New Orleans Saints, can establish the run game, you can help your quarterback out. He can be more aggressive and he can take advantage of a defense that has not been taking the ball away so much over the course of this season. Much like we talked about how the Saints are not, fielding a kicker to win them football games. This is an opportunity for Tyler Shough to just go out there and let it rip and let him go out there and do like he did up against the Carolina Panthers. Be aggressive, go and find those plays and be a playmaker. We didn't see that up against the Atlanta Falcons this past weekend. There was no offensive play greater than 18 yards, as we mentioned in yesterday's episode. A low yards per attempt, again under 6 yards per attempt in that game, coming off of one where it was over 10 yards per attempt in the passing game up against Carolina. So you want to see at least something in between those two performances, but ideally something that's closer to Carolina. So if you can get a little bit of a run game going, even without Alvin Kamara, it's a bad week to be without Alvin Kamara. But if you're without Alvin Kamara, if you can still find a way to get the run going with Devin Neal, who did some impressive things late in that game up against Atlanta. Audric Estime should not only be active, but actually on the field this time, getting some opportunities himself if Alvin Kamara can't go. Get that run game going up against a really bad run defense, and then see how you can open up this offense off of that. The other thing to watch in this one is that Miami has allowed the fewest passing yards to wide receivers in any defense across the NFL. A big part of that, though, is that they have also seen the third fewest targets to wide receivers across the NFL. Why? Because teams are running the football again. So just another thing to keep in mind there, to where if they are in a situation from an efficiency standpoint where they're performing well against wide receivers, where even though the wide receivers aren't getting targeted as much because teams are running the football, they're still not allowing a lot of big chunk plays, a lot of these other things. And so if you can go and find those, an opportunity there for you lies. Now, here's something else that they can take advantage of in the process. Despite the number of passing attempts all told being so low up against the Miami Dolphins because of their struggling run defense, they have allowed the 6th most receiving yards to tight ends in the NFL. And right now, one of the best tight ends in football from a receiving yard standpoint is Juwan Johnson, who's 4th amongst all tight ends in the league in receiving yards. So this could be a great game for Tyler Shough and Juwan Johnson to continue to bring back their connection from 2019 Oregon, which is an insane sentence to say out loud, but it is a sentence and it is true. And so there's a chance there for Kellen Moore, who you were waiting to see the offense come to life. It has not happened over the course of this year yet. We've seen sort of flashes of it. And Kellen Moore is a guy that has always been really good at scheming up tight ends in the passing game. Here's a chance. Here's a big chance. And a big tight end that has produced, particularly here down the stretch, in an impressive way, that has a connection, comfort, and chemistry with your rookie quarterback in Tyler Shough. This is a chance to instill some confidence in your offense and breed some confidence for your fan base because of what your offense is doing. A couple of other things for you to know. The Miami Dolphins defense not only is 29th in the NFL in total rushing yards allowed, they're number 28th in yards per carry allowed, just shy of 5 yards per carry allowed so far on the defensive side. That is 4.9 yards per carry that they've given up so far this season. So with that being the case, a real opportunity there for this run game to also get going. But you've got to be able to throw the football to alleviate and keep that box light, alleviate some of the attention to the run game, all those other pieces, so you can properly take advantage of that. The Dolphins generate pressure at an okay rate. They're number 17 in the NFL, so just barely the best of the second half of the NFL, if you will, when it comes to generating pressure, but have only pulled together 21 sacks on the season. So they might get some pressure, but they have not gotten a lot of sacks. Kind of reminds you a little bit of the New Orleans Saints defense from last year. High pressure rates, but not a lot of sacks. This year, lower pressure rates, but a bit more in terms of how they started the season, at least when it came to sacks. They did get 3 last week up against Kirk Cousins and the Atlanta Falcons. Finally, some players that you should know from that defense. Bradley Chubb right now, the big defensive end that they traded for from the Cleveland Browns. He now leads the team in sacks with 5. Jordan Brooks, the linebacker, leads the NFL with 125 tackles so far, leads the NFL in solo tackles as well with 75. And then safety Minkah Fitzpatrick, one of the 3 players that have interceptions so far this season. That makes up the total of the Miami Dolphins' 3 interceptions. It also leads the team with 6 passes defense as well. So maybe some opportunities there to attack the perimeter, try to keep the ball away from Minkah Fitzpatrick, but get the ball out before you end up under pressure from Bradley Chubb. So we'll see how the Saints handle it. But a big opportunity here against a stout Miami Dolphins defense on paper, but that has the glaring opportunities for you to be able to exploit some of their flaws. Here's a chance for Kellen Moore and Tyler Shough to bounce back a little bit after Atlanta and instill some confidence with where they're headed. The New Orleans Saints might be in a rebuild, but coming up next, I want to explain to you why that doesn't mean that they're immune from criticism. Let's get to that as we wrap up today's show here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance. You can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. The New Orleans Saints are indeed in the midst of a rebuild, and rebuilds do indeed require patience. It's one of the big things that we mentioned at the beginning of the season, that patience was going to have to be very, very important. Patience for Kellen Moore, patience for the New Orleans Saints, patience for their roster, patience for the fans, and patience from the media as well. However, patience is not the same as meaning, it doesn't mean that they are immune from criticism. It's okay to be critical or to critique what the New Orleans Saints are doing and or how they're doing it. And that delineation right there is one of the reasons why I believe that so strongly. It's not just about critiquing what it is that they're doing. Sometimes it's about critiquing what it is or how it is that they're doing it. So for instance, it's okay not to criticize the New Orleans Saints for losing games because no one expected them to win them. However, it's also okay to criticize the team for how they lose games and for the lack of competitiveness. And when you see a promise that has been made not being fulfilled, and the promise of hope from an offensive head coach, a young offensive mastermind that has turned in some historically bad results so far here through the first 12 weeks. So it's not that people are frustrated or impatient around the New Orleans Saints winning games. No one should be surprised by that. The fact that they're 2-9 and got a win on the road against Carolina is actually pretty surprising and something that you can still kind of hang a hat on if you'd like. But the way that they've lost some of these games, like getting in their own way, their inability to produce, some of the struggles that they've had, the self-inflicted wounds, and a lot of the sort of practice and exercise and repetition that we've heard from this team. It's my fault, it's my fault, it's my fault, it starts with me, all these other things that we're hearing recycled over and over again, but then no visual or demonstrative process on the field in terms of the results of what's happening on the field, not the results of the game, but the results in terms of explosive plays. Remember when that was a thing that the Saints weren't able to do very well at the beginning of the season? Well, it's still not a thing that the Saints do very well here near the end of the season. Again, just there are no plays at all over 18 yards up against the Atlanta Falcons with a very beatable defense and a very beatable opponent and a very winnable game. So it's okay to be frustrated with those things and still have the patience to say, well, they're in a rebuild. Let's see how things improve over the course of time. Let me give you some examples of that. Right now, we're seeing some of the worst offensive play that we have seen from a New Orleans Saints team in years. And yes, that includes Pete Carmichael's offenses. We're seeing an offense right now that's tied for last in points per game at just 15 points per game with the Las Vegas Raiders. That's number 20 in the NFL right now in passing yards, which actually isn't too terrible, but you'd like to see them higher than that with an offensive head coach that has been able to produce passing games before. They're number 29 in rushing yards, which is an absolute disappointment for this coaching staff and what was expected from this team. They're number 29 as well in point differential, making up more than half of the negative point differential of the NFC South. The NFC South is the only division in football right now, all together, where all four teams have a negative point differential, and they're up over 200 or under 200 in terms of that point differential, minus 208 or something like that. And the Saints account for 109 of those points, of that gap. And so not great in terms of that. Number 22 in the NFL when it comes to turnover differential as well. That's just, we knew that Brandon Staley defenses historically don't take the football away a ton, but they're very disruptive. But we also know that you were looking for this team to take care of the football under Kellen Moore, and they've not been able to do that. Now, some of that was a rush of a couple of games where the turnovers really piled up on quarterback Spencer Rattler, which led to his being sat and them turning the offense over to Tyler Shough. So we'll see how things continue to kind of motivate and move forward here, but still not enough that you're wanting to see from all of that. And of course, one of the worst red zone offenses in the last decade. Out of the 320 seasons that have been played so far, their 34.5 red zone to touchdown percentage is 317th. So the fourth worst red zone offense through the first 12 games of a season in the last 10 years, in the last decade. Those are things that the New Orleans Saints and that New Orleans Saints fans can be frustrated about, while still having patience for themselves and for their favorite football team, hoping that at some point it will get better. Both of the things can be true. And here's the thing, when it does eventually get better, and I will use that phrase, when it does eventually get better, it doesn't mean that all of the concern about where the Saints are right now is null and void. It doesn't all of a sudden mean that all the things that are happening right now didn't happen. It just means, thank goodness that's not happening anymore. And so a lot of people say you got to know darkness before you can know light, because you have to know how it is that the light impacts the darkness, right? Right now, it's a little dark. It's a little grim. But eventually the light switch is going to flip and things are going to move forward. I don't think it's going to be this season. I'm not completely convinced it's going to be 2026 either, if I'm being completely honest. But we don't know what the New Orleans Saints 2026 roster looks like. The thing that you should hope for, though, is that it doesn't look so much like their previous rosters. The next thing that the New Orleans Saints need to do, just like they did with their coaching staff, and maybe some changes to come on the coaching staff as well, because there are still some Sean Payton sort of backslides there on that coaching staff. The roster, especially on the offensive side, still a lot of the same roster from last year, or at the beginning of this year it was, with the exception of the change at quarterback, the addition of Brandon Cooks and some of the injuries that kept players off the field, and then, of course, the addition of Kelvin Banks Jr. There wasn't a lot different about the New Orleans Saints offensive personnel week 1, 2025 than week 1, 2024. Now things are looking a lot more different. Now, obviously, some of that has to do with injury, but also Rashid Shaheed, Trevor Penning, these guys traded away, so on and so forth. So New Orleans also needs to make changes over the course of the offseason for the same reason that they made changes on their roster, for the same reasons that they made changes in their coaching staff. If you're going to fail, at least fail doing something new. And the New Orleans Saints didn't do a lot new on their roster when it came to the top end of it. Very, very curious to see how that changes going into 2026. All right, let's get into a little bit of lanyard for you. Just a quick update on Alvin Kamara. I'm just going to say this from a speculation standpoint, not a source standpoint. We're going to learn a little bit more later on today. And of course, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday over the course of practices. But going back and watching it, I think textbook hip drop tackle that was not called. That we'll see if Caden Ellis ends up with a fine. Former New Orleans Saint, by the way, ends up with a fine. I think fines hit on Saturdays, if I remember correctly. We'll see if there ends up with a fine there, but ended up creating the injury. This is a reason why that tackle is supposed to be banned, flagged, and penalized in the NFL, and then eventually fined. But it ended up being the thing that knocked Alvin Kamara out for the rest of that game. And I would not be surprised on a speculation standpoint if he doesn't play this weekend either. Just listening to the way that Kellen Moore kind of talked about it when I asked about it, there was some confusion over which injury I was asking about, right? He came into the game with an ankle injury, left the game with a knee injury, and so there was some confusion about which injury I was asking about. That was my fault, not a big deal. But for just kind of the way that it was talked about, like, oh yeah, he's going to miss, well, we'll see. You know what I mean? Like the little slips of the tongue, things like that. It wouldn't be surprising if Alvin Kamara is not on the field. Furthermore, you've seen more evidence here. The Saints, in the midst of their kicker rotation and signing Samori Toure, moving on from Jaquan Jackson, the Saints also elevated running back Evan Hull, who's been on the practice squad for the past couple of weeks. They elevated him to the active roster. They added Ian Wheeler, another running back, to the practice squad. Both of those transactions seem to indicate that the team is at least prepared to not have Alvin Kamara on the field early on in the practice week, at the very, very least. And then we'll see how things roll when it comes to the rest of this week, this game, and then potentially the rest of the season as well, because the playbook around Alvin Kamara hasn't been very successful. The play of Alvin Kamara hasn't tuned in or turned in a lot of success. You've seen some flashy plays here and there, but not really anything consistently. And then now you add this knee injury on top of it. It's very, very interesting now to watch and see what's going to happen with one of the best players I've ever gotten to watch play football in Alvin Kamara as he goes through the rest of the year. But at this point, I just wouldn't be super surprised to not see him on Sunday based on the transactions that have been made around his injury. All right, y'all, coming up in tomorrow's episode, Kyle Kratz from Locked on Dolphins will be here for our crossover Thursday as we break down this weekend's matchup. Don't forget, you can catch us every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. over on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.